Hello, my dear friends. Victorian respectability was a mask, and behind it was a world you were never meant to see. In these polished homes, candy could hide lethal powders, children's medicine could carry narcotics, and fashionable gatherings sometimes involved inhaling chemicals for fun. The danger was woven into daily life so seamlessly that no one questioned it. Tonight, you'll step inside and feel just how close the edge really was. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soothing background, and let's embark on this journey together tonight. If you thought that buying strong medicine in the Victorian era required a doctor's approval or a careful examination, you would be mistaken. In many towns, the pharmacy was less a guarded medical office and more a shop with shelves open to anyone who had a few coins. The door was easy to push open, the counter was wide and uncluttered, and behind it stood rows of glass bottles filled with liquids of every colour. Some of them contained alcohol mixed with opium. Others held powders that could keep a person awake for days. None of them required you to prove you needed them. You only had to point to the bottle or name the remedy you wanted. The labels were printed in decorative fonts, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in English. They often made vague promises about restoring strength or clearing the mind. Ingredients were listed, but not in ways that most people could understand. Words like tincture, elixir, and cordial sounded safe enough, and that was often enough to make a sale. The recipes were described as secret or time-tested, but the reality was that many were mixtures created in the back room by the shopkeeper. It was common to see children sent to the pharmacy to pick up medicine for their parents. They would return home carrying bottles that today would require locked storage and a prescription. The shopkeeper rarely asked questions. Regular customers were remembered by name and greeted warmly. New customers were given polite service, often with a suggestion to try something extra. It is strange how easy it was to buy something that could stop a cough or stop a heartbeat, and no one seemed worried. Inside, the air smelled faintly of alcohol and herbs. The glass counter displayed boxes of pills, small tins of powders, and a selection of lozenges. Some products promised relief from nervousness, others from indigestion, and many claimed to cure nearly everything. Behind the counter, tall shelves held the stronger mixtures, but they were never truly out of reach. The pharmacy was a place where need and curiosity met without barriers. Some of the more expensive bottles came with embossed labels and cork stoppers sealed with wax. They looked almost like gifts rather than medication. People often kept them on display at home, on the same shelf as fine liquor. There was no stigma in owning these remedies. In fact, it was a sign that you cared for your health and had the means to do so. The business thrived because there was a steady flow of customers. Workers came in after long shifts to buy something to calm their nerves or help them sleep. Mothers came to buy soothing syrups for restless children. Elderly men came for tonics that claimed to improve strength and ease aches. If modern pharmacies operated this way, the line at the counter might look more like a queue for a bar than a medical facility. It was not unusual for someone to buy several kinds of medicine at once, a bottle for pain, a powder for digestion, and perhaps a tonic for energy. There was no sense that these might interact badly. The advice from the shopkeeper was usually to try them and see what worked. Word of mouth was the main source of recommendations. If a neighbour said a certain mixture helped them feel better, others would buy it without hesitation. Pharmacies competed for attention with bold advertisements in newspapers and posters in busy streets. They used images of strong, smiling men and healthy, graceful women. The text promised fast results and long-lasting benefits. There was rarely any mention of side effects. The lack of regulation meant that a company could make almost any claim it wanted. For many people, the pharmacy was one of the most important places in town. It was where you went when you felt unwell, but also where you went to improve your mood or give yourself extra energy. I think the most surprising part is how normal it all seemed to them, even though we would see it as reckless today. There was no separation between medicine for serious illness and substances taken simply to feel different. The result was a culture where self-medication was constant. People adjusted their own doses according to how they felt, a few drops more for a worse day, a little less when they felt fine. Some became dependent without even realizing it. The line between relief and habit was thin, and it was easy to cross without noticing. In the evenings, the pharmacy might still be open, lit by oil lamps that cast a soft glow over the bottles. Late customers came in quietly, bought what they needed, and left. The street outside might be dark, but inside the glass jars reflected the light, making the place look warm and safe. The truth was less comforting. Those jars held more than just remedies. They held the potential for harm as much as for healing. Behind the counter, the shopkeeper kept his records. They were not medical charts, just lists of who bought what and when. There was no law to keep these private. It was a way to remember who might be coming back soon and what they might want next time. Regular customers were valued, not because their health was improving, but because their purchases were steady. Some pharmacists were more careful than others, warning customers to be moderate, but many simply sold what was asked for. Business depended on trust, and trust was built by giving people what they wanted. In a world without strict oversight, the balance of power was tilted toward the seller. The buyer could only rely on their judgment, and that judgment was often influenced by habit and hope. When I think about how easily dangerous substances were sold at that time, it makes the modern rules seem far more reasonable. Today, certain medicines are locked behind counters or require signatures, but in the Victorian era, they were out in the open, waiting for anyone to take them home. The pharmacy was as much a social space as a medical one. As the years went by, this open-door approach shaped the way people saw medicine. It was not just a treatment for sickness, but part of everyday life. A bottle in the cupboard was as common as bread on the table. The idea that you could walk in, choose something strong, and leave without question became part of the rhythm of living. And so, in those streets where the lamps burned low and the air was thick with coal smoke, the pharmacy stood as a place of comfort and risk. It was where people found what they thought they needed, even when it was more than they should have taken. The door was always open, and the shelves were always full. The next time we step inside, we will see what happens when those shelves start to offer more than just medicine. If the pharmacy doors closed at night, the habit of what people bought there often opened the next day. For many in Victorian towns, the morning routine did not begin with food or even water. It began with a small bottle on the kitchen shelf. Inside was laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol, dark in colour and stronger than anything served at a table. The bottle was often left in plain sight, sometimes next to the tea tin or the sugar jar. A few drops into a cup were enough to start the day. In homes where the air was damp and heavy from the night, the first sip brought a kind of relief. The bitterness of the liquid mixed with tea was sharp, but quickly followed by a spreading warmth. It loosened the grip of morning aches, softened the edges of worry, and made the grey streets outside feel less oppressive. It is difficult not to notice that in some houses, laudanum was as common as bread, and perhaps more valued. The habit was easy to maintain because it fit so neatly into the rhythm of daily life. For people who worked long hours in factories or workshops, the early dose made the thought of the day ahead bearable. It dulled the discomfort of stiff joints and cleared the restlessness left over from the night. A second sip was not unusual if the first did not seem enough. The effect was mild at first, but even a mild calm was a welcome change from the usual noise and fatigue. In wealthier homes, laudanum was part of a more elaborate breakfast ritual. A maid might bring a tray with tea, a small dish of bread, and the familiar bottle. The same quantity was poured each day, measured by habit rather than by any real calculation. Guests were not shocked to see it. In many circles, it was considered a sign of refined living to start the day with something more than plain tea. The taste was not pleasant, but it was familiar, Over time, it became associated with the start of a new day, like the sound of the morning bell or the opening of shop shutters. The bitterness was a signal that things were beginning. People did not question whether it was wise to begin each day with a strong narcotic. The comfort it brought seemed proof enough. Some households kept multiple bottles, one in the kitchen and another in a bedroom. This ensured that even on cold mornings when getting out of bed was slow, the first sip could be taken before rising. If coffee shops had existed on every Victorian street, they might have been outnumbered by the number of rooms with laudanum within arm's reach. The convenience of having it nearby made it less like medicine and more like a morning necessity. Outside the home, those who left early for work often carried a small vial in a coat pocket. A dose could be taken discreetly while walking or upon arriving at the workplace. There was no shame in it. The practice was so common that seeing someone add drops to a drink did not draw attention. It was simply part of how the city moved through the hours. Not everyone took it for pain or illness. For some, it was simply to improve mood. A dull day became easier to endure, and small annoyances seemed less important. The early morning chill, the uneven streets, the heavy smell from the river, all felt more distant after the dose. I think the quiet acceptance of this habit says as much about the pace of life then as it does about the medicine itself. Pharmacies encouraged the practice by making laudanum available in different bottle sizes. Large bottles for the home, small ones for travel. Some even offered special blends with added flavouring to mask the bitterness. Advertising rarely warned about overuse. Instead, it spoke of relief, energy, and better mornings. Within families, the habit sometimes passed from one generation to the next. Children saw their parents taking it and grew up believing it was part of adult life. By the time they reached working age, the taste was not strange, and the effect was something they recognised. This quiet transfer of habit kept the demand steady, and the pharmacy counters busy. In the colder months, morning use often increased. The warmth it provided was a comfort against the damp air. A little extra was taken on days when the body felt slow to start, and soon the larger dose became the usual one. There was rarely a moment of decision to stop. The routine simply continued, unchallenged, until it was part of a person's identity. For those living alone, laudanum became more than a morning habit. It was a companion of sorts, a reliable presence that marked the start of the day. A sip in silence could be the only calm moment before the demands of work or the bustle of the streets. It required no conversation, no arrangement, only the steady hand of habit. Looking back, the danger was not in one morning's dose, but in the way each day's measure joined with the next. Weeks and months blurred together, and the body adjusted to expect the early drop. Skipping it could make a person irritable, sluggish, or unwell. But taking it kept them steady enough to go on. As the city woke around them, those who had already taken their laudanum moved through the streets with a certain calm. They blended into the crowd, indistinguishable from anyone else, except for the quiet glow in their eyes and the small bottles hidden in their homes. The habit was private, but far from rare. By the time the morning work began, the effects were fully in place. The day ahead seemed possible, no matter the weather, the noise, or the weight of labour waiting. The pharmacy had done its part the day before, and the bottle would be there again tomorrow. And so the mornings rolled forward, each one marked by the same small act, repeated without question. In the next part, we will follow these bottles beyond the breakfast table, into the long hours of labour and the midday markets where laudanum met the wider world. The habit of starting the day with laudanum often carried into other parts of life, especially mealtimes. In many homes, the strong taste of medicine was not always taken directly from a spoon or a cup. It was mixed into whatever was already on the table. Tea was the most common choice. A few drops would disappear into the steam, changing the drink in a way that only the drinker understood. The bitterness softened when paired with sugar, making it easier to take without a grimace. Soup was another favoured medium, in a city where the midday meal was often little more than a thin broth with bread. adding medicine to the bowl was practical. It spared the effort of remembering a separate dose later. The warmth of the soup carried the taste well enough, and no one asked why the flavour seemed slightly different from the day before. In households where the habit was shared, it became a silent agreement. The meal was both nourishment and treatment. Sweet foods offered an even more discreet way to consume these substances. Biscuits, candies, and small cakes could hide more than just their fillings. Pharmacists and home cooks alike knew that sugar masked bitterness effectively. Some shops even sold pre-flavoured mixtures, intended for blending into desserts. Children, without knowing, sometimes ate them as part of the family table. It is unsettling to think how easily a child could be dosed under the pretense of giving them a treat. In public gatherings, these practices were less obvious but still present. A hostess might serve punch or tea laced with a small amount of tonic, claiming it made the drink more refreshing. Guests would sip without suspicion. The idea of refusing such hospitality was rare. People trusted that whatever was served was meant for comfort, not harm. The approach was convenient. There was no need to stop the day for medicine when it could be folded into a normal activity. Those who disliked the taste of certain remedies found this the easiest way to take them. The routine was gentle in appearance, even pleasant, but its effects were no less powerful than a direct dose. In markets, vendors sometimes sold candies and lozenges openly advertised as health aids. These were not entirely without merit for minor ailments, but their contents could be far stronger than modern regulations would allow. A person could buy a bag of sweets that carried enough narcotic to numb pain for hours. If such things were on store shelves today, they would likely be placed behind locked glass and sold with warnings. Yet in that time, they were bought as casually as fruit or bread. For those already accustomed to daily use, adding medicine to food meant less thought about timing. A small amount here, another there, and by the end of the day, they had consumed more than they realized. This quiet accumulation was part of why dependency crept in so easily. It was not always a matter of willpower. Sometimes it was simply the sum of small decisions repeated often. Families with limited resources found creative ways to stretch their supplies. A stronger batch might be diluted and divided among several meals. It made the bottle last longer, even if the effect was weaker. This thrift was practical but kept the habit alive, ensuring the next bottle would be purchased soon enough. In wealthier households, the presentation mattered as much as the contents. Silver spoons, porcelain cups, and fine trays accompanied the dosing. The appearance was one of refinement, not addiction. Guests could be served a sweetened tea with laudanum as part of a polite afternoon visit. No one called it medicine in such settings. It was simply part of the service. The difference between casual use and deliberate dosing blurred over time. What began as an occasional way to ease discomfort became a permanent feature of the dining table. People forgot there had been a time when these additions were not present. The taste became part of the expected flavour, especially in drinks. Children grew up knowing no other version of certain dishes. Pharmacies contributed to this blending of medicine and food by selling syrups in flavours like cherry, mint, and vanilla. The packaging emphasised taste almost as much as effectiveness. Some even suggested recipes for incorporating the medicine into puddings or drinks. The line between treatment and indulgence became faint. I think this merging of food and medicine says a great deal about how normalised drug use has become in daily life. Out on the streets, small stalls sometimes offered confections that claimed to soothe throats or settle the stomach. These were easy to buy and easier to eat, often without thinking about what they contained. A worker might carry a handful in a pocket, taking one during a long day. By evening, the packet was empty, and the dose far higher than intended. Even in hospitals, where the setting was more controlled, flavoured preparations were used to encourage patients to take their treatments. This habit, learned there, followed them home. Once a person knew that a bitter liquid could be made pleasant with sugar or mixed into food, the barrier to regular use dropped further. Over time, recipes were passed down within families, not as medical instructions but as part of household cooking. a certain tea blend for winter, a sweet syrup for sleepless nights, a special cake for aches. These traditions kept the link between medicine and daily meals alive, long after their original purpose was forgotten. By the close of the century, the habit was so embedded that removing it would have required more than warnings. It would have required changing the way people thought about food, comfort, and health. And in a world where so much was uncertain, people clung to what they knew, even if it carried hidden risks. The table remained a place where nourishment and narcotics met without conflict. A cup, a bowl, or a plate could carry more than just food. In the next part, we will move beyond the dining table and into the workplaces and markets where these substances followed people through the rest of their day. After the meals were cleared and the day's work was done, the focus in many Victorian homes shifted to rest. Sleep was not always easy to find in crowded neighbourhoods, where walls were thin and streets stayed busy long after dark. In these conditions, a quiet night for the whole household was a valuable thing. Chloral hydrate, a sedative available without difficulty, became one of the simplest ways to achieve it. The small glass bottle sat in many kitchens or on bedside tables. Its presence did not carry any sense of alarm. A measured amount was mixed into water, tea, or milk before bed. The taste was faint and easily covered with a bit of sugar. Once taken, it worked quickly, calming restless minds and heavy limbs until sleep came. It is remarkable how something so strong could be treated as casually as a cup of warm milk. Children who struggled to settle at night were often given smaller doses. This spared parents the repeated trips to check on them or soothe their complaints. In homes where work began early and ended late, having children sleep through the night meant fewer disruptions. Adults took it as well, especially those who found their thoughts racing or their bodies sore from labour. The effect was reliable. Within minutes, a stillness spread through the house. The sounds from outside became less important, and the clatter of daily life inside faded away. For many families, this was the first true quiet they experienced all day. It became easy to see why the habit formed quickly. The affordability of chloral hydrate made it even more common. It could be purchased in larger bottles for regular use, or in smaller amounts for those who use it occasionally. Pharmacists sold it alongside other popular remedies, often recommending it for sleeplessness without any concern for how often it might be taken. There was no clear advice on how long it should be used, only reassurance that it worked. Some households built it into their nightly routine. After dinner, the bottle would be placed on the table next to the tea or dessert. Everyone who wanted some took it without question. The association between the evening meal and the evening dose became strong, and skipping it felt unusual. If modern households adopted such a routine, the kitchen counter would look more like a dispensary than a place for family gatherings. Parents valued the predictability it brought. A calm night meant they could rest without interruption, making the following day easier to face. This was especially important in homes with limited space, where several people shared a room. One restless person could disturb the entire group. Chloral hydrate removed that problem neatly. There were, of course, risks. Regular use led to dependence, though the word was rarely used. People spoke of it as a helpful habit rather than a dangerous one. If someone could not sleep without it, that was seen as proof of its effectiveness rather than a warning sign. I think this way of thinking shows how much trust was placed in remedies simply because they delivered results. In wealthier homes, chloral hydrate was served in more refined ways. A small glass of cordial or a sweetened cup of tea disguised its presence entirely. Guests might be offered a drink before bed and wake the next day unaware of what had helped them sleep so soundly. Among close friends and family, this was seen as a kindness rather than something to question. Even in hospitals and care facilities, chloral hydrate was a standard choice for patients who struggled to rest. The pattern was the same: a measured serving, a quiet room, and the expectation of an undisturbed night. Many patients took the habit home with them after discharge, finding it too useful to leave behind. The easy availability of the drug also meant that it could be kept on hand for more than just bedtime use. Some reached for it during the day if anxiety or agitation became too much. The calming effect, though intended for sleep, made stressful situations easier to endure. In this way, it crossed from being a nighttime aid to a general solution for discomfort. Over time, the line between need and habit blurred. People forgot the first night they used it, or the reason they began. The routine became self-sustaining. Bottles were replaced before they were empty to avoid a night without it. In some cases, families stocked more than one, ensuring it was always available in different parts of the home. Children raised in such households grew up believing that medicine for sleep was normal. They learned to associate certain tastes and smells with bedtime. This familiarity meant that when they became adults, they were more likely to continue the practice. The habit passed quietly from one generation to the next, rarely questioned and rarely discussed. For those living in noisy districts, the drug was more than convenient. It was a way to block out the chaos beyond their walls. The shouting from the streets, the rumble of carriages, and the sound of neighbours arguing could all be dulled into nothing. The silence it created was not natural, but it was welcome. By the end of the century, chloral hydrate had become one of the most trusted remedies in the home. Its role was simple: ensure that everyone slept. Few stopped to wonder what it might be doing to their bodies beyond that. The priority was rest, and it delivered. Night after night, the same ritual played out. Bottles were opened, liquids poured, and the house grew still. It was a picture of peace, but one built on dependence. In the next part, we will leave the quiet of the bedrooms and look at how some sought a different kind of escape in the lively streets beyond their doors. The search for quiet in Victorian homes did not end with adults. Children, especially infants and toddlers, were often at the centre of household noise and restlessness. In a time when medical advice was loose and advertising bold, products like Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup became staples in many homes. The label promised relief for teething pains, coughs, and general fussiness. It was sold as gentle and safe, qualities that made it easy for parents to trust. The syrup was sweet, with a pleasant flavour that encouraged children to swallow it without resistance. Beneath the sugar, however, it contained morphine in doses that could easily overpower a small body. For many parents, the most noticeable effect was the stillness that followed. A child who had been crying or squirming moments earlier would soon grow calm, their eyes heavy and their breathing slow. It is unsettling how this outcome was seen as a sign of success rather than a reason for concern. Mothers often kept a bottle within reach, ready for moments when nothing else seemed to work. In homes where other children needed attention or work demanded focus, having one less voice crying in the background was considered a blessing. The syrup offered a shortcut to peace, a way to manage more than just discomfort. The product was widely available, sold in pharmacies and general stores without any requirement for proof of need. Advertising campaigns praised it as a solution every parent should keep at hand. Testimonials in newspapers described grateful families whose children slept through the night after just one spoonful. The tone was confident, reassuring, and without warning. For many, the appeal lay not just in quieting a child, but in making their own lives easier. A day could be less stressful when a child is calm, allowing parents to handle chores, earn income, or simply rest. The syrup became part of the rhythm of care, used for both genuine illness and ordinary restlessness. If a modern product promised to stop a child from crying and keep them asleep for hours, it would likely face intense scrutiny before ever reaching a store shelf. In poorer districts, the syrup was sometimes shared among families, passed from one home to another when a baby's crying grew too much. In wealthier households, multiple bottles might be stocked to avoid running out. The practice cut across social lines because the desire for quiet was universal. Some parents gave it regularly at bedtime, whether or not the child was ill. Over time, this routine became so ingrained that skipping it seemed risky. Parents feared that without it, the night would be filled with noise and interruption. This dependency was not on the part of the child alone, but on the parents who had come to rely on the guaranteed calm. The dangers, while less discussed at the time, were always present. Morphine's ability to slow breathing meant that even a slight excess could become dangerous. Yet without clear instructions or standardized measurements, doses were often given by estimation. A spoonful could mean different amounts in different homes. In some cases, children became unusually drowsy during the day, and their energy dulled even when they were awake. This was not always recognized as a problem. Parents interpreted it as a sign of a well-behaved child. Neighbors complimented the quiet, unaware of the reason. I think the way silence was valued over vitality says much about the pressures of daily life then. Pharmacies continued to stock Mrs. Winslow's and similar syrups because demand remained steady. No official body monitored the safety of such products, and warnings, if they existed, were small and easy to overlook. The combination of sweet taste, low cost, and reliable effect kept it popular year after year. In larger cities, advertisements were painted directly onto the sides of buildings, making the product a familiar sight even to those who had never used it. The brand name became shorthand for calming a child, much like a household phrase. This visibility reinforced its reputation as trustworthy, especially in the absence of competing advice. Even when occasional reports surfaced about adverse effects, they were often dismissed or explained away. Families pointed to the many times the syrup had worked without harm. In their experience, the benefits outweighed any vague, distant risks. It would take many more years before the broader dangers of such regular morphine use in children were widely acknowledged. The habit passed between generations. Mothers taught their daughters how to prepare the spoon, how much to give, and when. These instructions were as much part of parenting advice as how to swaddle or feed an infant. Once learned, they were rarely questioned. By the close of the century, countless children had been raised with the aid of morphine-laced syrups. Some survived without obvious harm, others may have carried unseen effects into later life. At the time, there was little effort to connect long-term health issues with early exposure to such powerful substances. In the homes that used it, the result was predictable quieter nights, calmer days, and fewer disruptions. The bottle stood among other common household items, not locked away or treated with caution. Its role was simply to make life more manageable in a world where every day was a balance between work, care, and survival. And so, as the lamps dimmed and the streets outside grew quiet, the same quiet was replicated indoors. The syrup had done its work, and the night stretched ahead in stillness. In the next part, we will leave the nurseries and kitchens to see how the same craving for relief shaped the habits of those working in the city's busiest trades. From the quiet of the nursery, the story of Victorian drug use moves to a very different setting. The dentist's chair. Dentistry in that era was not a comfortable experience. Tools were basic, anesthesia was limited, and the sound of metal on enamel was often enough to make patients dread an appointment. When cocaine began to be used as a numbing agent for dental work, it was seen as a remarkable improvement. The numbness spread quickly through the gums, allowing extractions and fillings to be done with far less pain. For many, it was the first time they could sit through a procedure without gripping the arms of the chair until their knuckles were white. The use of cocaine in dentistry became popular with surprising speed. Bottles were prepared in concentrated form, applied directly to the gums with a small swab or brush. The effect was almost immediate, dulling sensation in the area so completely that patients often remarked on the absence of discomfort. In an age when pain was expected as part of medical treatment, this was nothing short of revolutionary. It is difficult not to notice how quickly something meant for the clinic found its way into daily life. After a visit to the dentist, patients are sometimes left with a small vial of cocaine solution. Officially, it was meant for aftercare, to be used if pain returned once the numbing wore off. In practice, many found other uses for it. The euphoria and alertness that accompanied the numbness were considered pleasant side effects. It did not take long for word to spread that this was more than just a dental aid. In social circles, particularly among the middle and upper classes, cocaine began to appear in unexpected places. Guests at small gatherings might be offered a taste in much the same way they would be offered a drink. It was not consumed in large amounts, but enough to produce a warm confidence and ease in conversation. People who might otherwise have been shy found themselves speaking more freely. If a modern dinner party served dental anaesthetic alongside the wine, it would likely make the evening memorable for all the wrong reasons. Pharmacies, seeing the growing interest, stocked small bottles for private purchase. While the labelling might still suggest medical use, the reality was understood. The boundaries between medicine and recreation blurred further with each sale. Those who had tried it at the dentist knew exactly what they were buying. In working-class neighbourhoods, access was less common due to cost, but not unheard of. A small amount could be shared among friends, especially during festive occasions. The stimulant effect made long nights feel shorter and conversations livelier. There was little discussion about the risks. The focus was on the immediate sense of energy and sociability it brought. Cocaine's portability made it easy to carry discreetly. Small vials fit easily into pockets or handbags. This meant it could be used almost anywhere without drawing attention. At theatres, concerts, or private clubs, it might be shared quietly between acquaintances. The sense of exclusivity added to its appeal. Some saw it as a mark of sophistication. Just as fine wines or imported cigars were signs of taste, so too was the possession of a refined stimulant. The fact that it had legitimate medical uses gave it a layer of respectability that other intoxicants did not enjoy. People could claim they were simply managing discomfort, even if the real goal was a different kind of relief. In some cases, dentists themselves encouraged this broader use. Repeat customers meant steady business, and providing a small supply for personal care ensured goodwill. Without strict oversight, there was little to stop such practices. What began as a professional courtesy became a quiet form of promotion. The physiological effects were not ignored entirely. Some users noticed restlessness, trouble sleeping, or a crash in mood after the stimulant wore off. Still, these drawbacks were accepted as minor compared to the benefits. In an era without the modern understanding of addiction, the risks were not fully recognized or discussed. I think the willingness to overlook these effects shows how strong the desire for quick improvement was, whether in health, mood, or confidence. Public spaces began to reflect this change in habits. It was not unusual to see someone dab a bit onto their gums before speaking at a meeting or engaging in a negotiation. The sharp clarity it provided could be an advantage in settings where persuasion and quick thinking mattered. For others, it was simply part of feeling prepared. As with many substances of the time, the lack of formal restrictions meant that usage patterns developed organically. Those who enjoyed the effects found reasons to incorporate them into more and more occasions. Celebrations, stressful days, or even routine social visits became opportunities. The line between special use and everyday use wore away over time. Cocaine-infused lozenges and other preparations appeared briefly on the market, catering to those who preferred a more discreet method. While not as potent as the liquid form, they still delivered enough of the drug to be felt. These products were marketed with the same confidence that characterized so many Victorian remedies, promising vitality and comfort without acknowledging the potential costs. The culture around its use was shaped as much by perception as by chemistry. Because it began as a dental aid, it carried none of the stigma that might have come with other drugs. It was a tool, a convenience, even a small luxury. In social gatherings, offering it was a way to show generosity and status. By the close of the century, cocaine had secured a place not only in medical kits, but in the small rituals of leisure and sociability. It was passed between friends, offered to guests, and kept on hand for moments when an extra edge seemed useful. The journey from dentist's chair to drawing room was surprisingly short, and few seemed to question whether that was wise. What began as a way to avoid pain during dental work had become another thread in the fabric of Victorian daily life. The same bottle that had been opened under the harsh light of a clinic could be opened again under the soft glow of an evening lamp, this time not for relief, but for enjoyment. In the next part, we will step out of the parlours and into the public spaces where substances like these moved more freely than the people who used them. From the drawing rooms and parlours where cocaine had found its place, the story of Victorian drug use shifts to the street and the home, where another kind of stimulant was making its rounds. Ether, along with other inhaled chemicals, offered a different sort of escape. Instead of numbing pain or sharpening focus, these vapours could lift a person's mood almost instantly. The process was simple, required no elaborate equipment, and could be done almost anywhere. That convenience made it appealing to people across the social spectrum. Small bottles of ether were sold in pharmacies, sometimes with vague instructions for medical use. Officially, it might be suggested for calming nerves, relieving minor discomfort, or even cleaning wounds. In practice, many people discovered that inhaling it directly brought a rush of lightness to the body and mind. The effect was quick, a sudden shift from whatever worries filled the day to a detached and buoyant state. It is remarkable how a liquid meant for cleaning could just as easily become a way to forget the day's problems. At home, some kept a bottle in the kitchen or a bedside cabinet. A small cloth could be soaked with a measure of ether, then held close enough to breathe in the fumes. Within seconds, the sharp chemical scent would give way to a strange calm. Muscles relaxed, thoughts drifted, and the weight of daily burden seemed to lift. For some, it was a momentary relief from fatigue. For others, it was a way to chase away boredom. On the streets, ether was not as hidden. In certain markets and public spaces, groups would gather in quiet corners to share it. The act was not always discreet. A handkerchief passed from one person to another could be recognized by those familiar with the habit. Vendors sometimes sold pre-soaked cloths, offering a quick hit for a small coin. The affordability and speed of the effect made it popular among workers looking for a break from long hours. Among the upper classes, ether sometimes appeared in more controlled settings. Private gatherings could include a small tray with bottles and cloths, offered alongside drinks. The atmosphere was less about escape from hardship and more about experimenting with sensation. Guests would recline in chairs, taking turns, and then drift into conversation or laughter with a softened edge. If modern social events replaced cocktails with bottles of solvent, the reaction would likely be less amused. The appeal was in its immediacy. Unlike other substances that needed to be ingested and take time to work, inhaled chemicals altered mood within moments. That speed meant they could be used in short breaks, between tasks, or even during them. The shift in feeling was noticeable, and for many, addictive in its way. But the quick onset also carried risks. Too much ether could lead to dizziness, confusion, or even unconsciousness. In crowded public spaces, this sometimes caused scenes that drew unwanted attention. People would sway, stumble, or speak in a way that revealed their altered state. In some cases, they simply lay down where they were, unable or unwilling to move. These incidents fed a reputation for odd and unpredictable behaviour among users. Pharmacies did little to curb this misuse. As long as customers paid, bottles were sold without question. The chemical was cheap to produce, and sales were steady. While some pharmacists may have cautioned against inhaling it, many said nothing, understanding that the demand was not driven by medical needs. I think the quiet acceptance of such sales shows how profit often outweighed caution in that era. In workplaces, especially those with repetitive tasks, ether became a shared secret. A few breaths could break the monotony, making the hours pass more quickly. Supervisors often looked the other way as long as the work was done. In some trades, it even became part of the culture, with new workers introduced to it by older ones. The portability of ether made it even harder to control. A small bottle could be hidden easily, and the act of using it could be disguised as simply smelling a scented cloth. This meant it could be brought into theatres, train compartments, or even churches without drawing too much notice. Over time, the habit shaped social behaviour. People sought out companions who shared their interest in inhalants, creating informal networks. These groups sometimes overlapped with other circles of drug use, mixing substances in ways that increased the unpredictability of their effects. In some households, ether was kept for legitimate purposes but used recreationally when opportunity arose. A bottle intended for cleaning wounds might end up in the hands of someone looking for a different kind of relief. The thin line between medical supply and intoxicant blurred again, just as it had with so many Victorian remedies. Public health concerns did surface occasionally, usually after a highly visible incident. A person collapsing in the middle of a market or behaving erratically at a public event could spark temporary calls for restriction. But without strong regulation, these moments passed and the practice continued. The allure was not only in the sensation but in the shared experience. Passing a bottle or cloth among friends created a small bond, a moment of escape that was understood without words. In a time when life could be harsh and entertainment limited, such moments carried weight. By the end of the century, ether and other inhalants had become another thread in the fabric of everyday life for some Victorians. It was not as universal as laudanum or as fashionable as cocaine, but it held a steady place in the habits of those who valued quick and simple relief. The consequences, both physical and social, were accepted as part of the bargain, in the streets, in the home, and in the quiet corners of gatherings. The practice persisted. The tools were simple, the cost was low, and the effect was certain. In the next part, we will turn to a different kind of daily habit, one that blended health claims with indulgence in the form of colourful, sweetened medicines that promised to make life better with every sip. From the quick, sharp use of ether in streets and homes, the focus shifts to a slower, more deliberate ritual. Smoking opium in Victorian society was not only about the substance itself, but also about the process. In certain circles, it was framed as a refined activity, something that required preparation, special tools, and a patient hand. The setting was often private, away from the noise of the street, in a room arranged for comfort. A small oil lamp provided the steady heat needed. The flame was not large or bright, but constant, ensuring the right temperature to prepare the opium. The tools were part of the ritual: a long pipe, polished and carefully handled, and a small tray for holding the substance. Each movement was measured. The opium was shaped into a small pellet, placed at the end of the pipe, and held over the lamp until it softened. Then came the slow inhale, drawing the smoke deep before letting it out in a thin stream. It is almost strange to think how much care was taken to prepare something that could so easily take control of a life. The act was unhurried. Participants often reclined on low couches or cushions, settling into positions that allowed them to relax completely. The room might be dim, lit only by the lamp and perhaps a few candles. Curtains or screens added to the sense of enclosure. Once the first inhalation was complete, the body eased into a state that was both heavy and distant. The surrounding world faded into the background. For many, this was the appeal. The sensation was not abrupt like ether, nor purely stimulating like cocaine. Instead, it brought a slow detachment from the demands of the day. Muscles loosened, thoughts slowed, and conversation, if it happened at all, was quiet and sparse. In these moments, the pace of life seemed to change. Among the wealthy, opium smoking could be a social event. Guests were invited into specially arranged rooms, often with decorative screens, ornate lamps, and fine textiles. The equipment was kept clean and polished, adding to the impression that this was a cultivated pastime. Hosts might provide the opium and prepare it for their guests, ensuring the process was done correctly. If modern gatherings treated a dangerous drug with the same elegance as serving afternoon tea, the contradiction would be difficult to ignore. In less affluent settings, the ritual was simpler but still deliberate. The tools might be more worn, the surroundings more modest, but the pace and method were the same. Even in small rented rooms or shared lodgings, a space could be set aside for the practice. Pharmacies and certain suppliers ensured that those who wished to smoke opium had access to it. It could be purchased in various forms, some more concentrated than others. The legality and availability meant that, for those who could afford it, supply was rarely an issue. The social perception of opium smoking varied. For some, it was a sign of worldliness, a connection to distant cultures and exotic trade. For others, it carried an undercurrent of moral concern, especially when linked to neglect of responsibilities. Still, in private rooms across the city, the practice continued. The method itself encouraged repetition. Each preparation led naturally to another. The transition from one inhalation to the next was seamless, and hours could pass unnoticed. Those who partook regularly began to find the sessions a necessary part of their routine. Without them, the day felt incomplete. Some users claimed the practice helped with ailments, from sleeplessness to persistent pain. Whether or not the relief was real, the association between smoking and comfort grew stronger with each use. Over time, the body adjusted, requiring more to achieve the same effect. In some communities, opium smoking was a shared habit, with small groups meeting regularly. The same faces gathered, the same tools were used, and the same quiet filled the room once the process began. These gatherings could create a sense of belonging, even as they reinforced dependence. I think the calmness of these scenes hides the reality that such habits rarely stay within the limits people imagine. Outside the private rooms, the influence of opium could still be seen. Those who smoked regularly often moved more slowly, spoke less, and seemed detached from the events around them. Friends and family might notice changes in behaviour, but in an age where open discussion of addiction was rare, these signs were often left unspoken. The economic side of the habit was also significant. Maintaining the tools and supplies requires steady spending. For the wealthy, this was manageable. For others, it meant diverting money from other needs. Yet the priority was clear: the next session was worth more than many other comforts. By the later years of the century, the refined image of opium smoking had begun to shift. Reports of its dangers grew more frequent, but the quiet, controlled nature of the ritual allowed it to keep its place in certain social circles. The association with leisure and refinement made it harder for some to see it as a threat. In the rooms where the lamps burned and the smoke curled slowly upward, time seemed to stand still. The outside world, with all its noise and urgency, felt far away. The reality, however, was that the same patterns played out night after night, binding people to a habit that promised peace but asked for much in return. The gentle appearance of the ritual masked the weight it placed on the body and mind. In the next part, we will turn from the slow pace of these sessions to the bright displays and bold claims of the pharmacies, where substances were dressed in flavour and colour to appeal to every kind of customer. From the quiet haze of opium rooms, the Victorian appetite for chemical comfort took another form in the brightly lit windows of pharmacies and general stores. Here, the products were not hidden behind curtains or prepared in private. They were displayed openly, dressed in colourful packaging designed to attract the eye and suggest health, vigour, and modern sophistication. These were the patent medicines, sold as tonics, elixirs, and restorative drinks. Their appeal lay not only in their contents but in the image they projected. Boxes were printed with intricate patterns, gold lettering, and illustrations of robust men and graceful women. Bottles were labelled in bold type, promising improved energy, sharper minds, and longer life. The names were chosen carefully, evoking trust, tradition, or exotic origins. Customers browsing the shelves could not miss them. They stood out among the plain glass jars and paper-wrapped parcels. It is curious how much effort was put into making something dangerous look like a gift. Instructions were printed clearly, but they often encouraged frequent use. A dose before breakfast, another in the afternoon, and perhaps one more before bed. The suggestion was that regular consumption was the key to lasting results. This made the bottles empty quickly, and the customer returned for more. The cycle suited the seller well, ensuring steady sales without any guarantee that the promised effects were real. The claims were bold. Some tonics promised to cure fatigue, indigestion, and nervousness all at once. Others claimed to strengthen the heart, cleanse the blood, or improve the complexion. The language was confident and absolute, with no mention of side effects or risks. For many buyers, these products seemed like an easy solution to the common discomforts of daily life. Advertising played a central role in their success. Posters were pasted on walls and fences, advertisements ran in newspapers, and painted signs appeared on the sides of buildings. The messages were consistent. This tonic was the one you needed, and everyone should be taking it. Testimonials were printed alongside the ads, with named individuals praising the results. Whether these endorsements were genuine or invented mattered little to most readers. In shops, the products were placed at eye level or near the counter. The bright colours and ornate shapes of the bottles made them ideal for display. Some even came with small promotional items, such as spoons or measuring cups, as if to make the act of dosing more refined. If modern energy drinks were sold with the same lack of regulation, their labels might read like miniature novels. The pricing varied, but many were affordable enough to attract a wide range of customers. This was important because the appeal of these tonics was universal. The labourer who felt worn down by long hours, the housewife who struggled with constant chores, and the clerk who sat hunched over paperwork all saw a reason to try them. The products promised not just relief but improvement, a better version of oneself in a bottle. The actual ingredients were often a mix of alcohol, sugar, and small amounts of stimulants or narcotics. These gave an immediate sense of energy or calm, depending on the formulation. The effect might last only a short time, but it was enough to convince many that the tonic worked. The pleasant taste and warm sensation reinforced the habit. Over time, some users began to rely on these feelings to get through the day. Pharmacies stocked multiple brands, each competing for attention with even more elaborate packaging or louder claims. Some emphasized exotic sources, boasting of rare herbs from distant lands. Others leaned on supposed scientific breakthroughs, citing laboratory processes and expert endorsements. The competition drove both creativity and exaggeration. In wealthier households, keeping a variety of tonics was a mark of care and modernity. Guests might be offered a glass as a sign of hospitality. The presence of these bottles suggested that the host was attentive to health and up to date with the latest remedies. In poorer homes, a single bottle might be stretched over weeks, used sparingly when someone felt particularly run down. The lack of regulation meant that almost anything could be sold under the label of a tonic. This freedom encouraged experimentation among manufacturers. Some added colourings to make the liquid more appealing, while others adjusted the flavour to mask bitterness. A pleasant taste made it easier to recommend to friends, spreading the product through personal networks as effectively as any advertisement. Doctors sometimes expressed concern over these medicines, but their voices were drowned out by the volume of marketing. The public's trust was bolstered by the constant visibility of these products and the sense that everyone was using them. To question their safety was to question a widely accepted part of daily life. I think this shows how repetition and presentation can make almost anything seem normal. In some cases, the same company produced multiple products under different names, targeting various segments of the market. One tonic might be aimed at men, promising strength and endurance. Another might be aimed at women, promising beauty and calm nerves. A third might claim to be suitable for children, offering gentle benefits while containing many of the same active ingredients. Shops also hosted demonstrations, with sales representatives explaining the benefits and sometimes offering free samples. These events drew crowds, especially in towns where entertainment was scarce. People left with bottles in hand, ready to try the latest cure-all. Over time, the habit of taking tonics became routine for many. The bottles were kept in kitchens, bedrooms, or even workplaces, A dose could be taken at any time of day, often without much thought. This constant availability made it easy to rely on them for minor discomforts that might otherwise have passed on their own. By the end of the century, the culture around patent medicines and tonics was firmly established. They were as much a part of the visual landscape as shop signs and street lamps. Their promises were rarely questioned, and their risks were rarely discussed. For those who sold them, the combination of persuasive advertising and repeat customers was proof of success. The shelves of the pharmacy told the story clearly, rows of brightly coloured bottles, each claiming to be the answer to life's small and large problems. In the next part, we will look beyond the shop fronts to the kitchens and parlours where these bottles were opened, mixed, and consumed as part of the daily rhythm. From the bright shelves of tonics and bottled remedies, the Victorian fascination with self-improvement extended naturally into the realm of beauty. Here, too, appearance was tied to social standing, and the lengths to which people would go to maintain it often ignored the cost to their health. Cosmetics were widely available, and many were made with ingredients that today would be considered dangerous. The knowledge of their risks was minimal, and even when suspicions arose, they were rarely strong enough to change habits. Lead-based face powders were among the most common. The pale complexion they produced was associated with refinement, signalling that one did not have to labour outdoors. The powder clung smoothly to the skin, covering blemishes and evening out the tone, yet its long-term use could cause skin damage, headaches, and more severe symptoms. The danger was invisible at first, making it easy for users to dismiss. It is remarkable how something that slowly poisons you could be marketed as a sign of good taste. Mercury-based creams promised to smooth the skin and remove imperfections. Applied regularly, they could lighten freckles and fade dark spots. These creams were often imported and sold at a higher price, giving them an air of exclusivity. The burning sensation they sometimes caused was explained away as proof that the product was working. The idea that such irritation could be harmful was not widely accepted. Belladonna drops were another strange addition to beauty routines. They were used to dilate the pupils, creating a look that was considered alluring. The effect was temporary but dangerous, with repeated use potentially harming vision. The appeal lay in the instant change to one's appearance, a visible transformation that did not require weeks of application. If modern beauty products required you to risk your eyesight, they would probably still find a market. The packaging of these products mirrored the elegance of the tonics from the previous part. Small glass jars and delicate bottles were decorated with ornate labels and sometimes wrapped in tissue paper. They were displayed in shop windows alongside perfumes and hair accessories, blurring the line between luxury and necessity. Buying them was as much about being seen as it was about the actual results. There were no ingredient lists or warnings on most of these items. The secrecy of their formulas was often presented as a selling point, with manufacturers claiming that the exact blend of components was a closely guarded trade secret. Customers took this as a mark of sophistication rather than a cause for concern. The lack of transparency suited sellers, allowing them to change recipes based on cost or availability without informing the public. In wealthier households, beauty products were stored in dedicated dressing tables or cabinets. Ladies might spend part of the morning carefully applying creams, powders, and drops. In smaller homes, these routines were often performed at the kitchen table, using a small mirror propped up against a jar or vase. The setting varied, but the desire for the finished look did not. The presence of these products in daily life meant that young women grew up watching their mothers and older sisters use them. By the time they were old enough to apply makeup themselves, the habit felt natural. Concerns about safety were rarely discussed openly, and the few who questioned the products were often dismissed as overly cautious. I think this shows how tradition can normalize even the most questionable practices. Beauty standards reinforced the use of these chemicals. A pale, smooth complexion was considered a sign of elegance, while blemishes or uneven skin were viewed as faults to be corrected. Photographs and paintings of the time often idealized these features, making the goal seem attainable with the right products. the social pressure to meet these standards could be as strong as any personal desire. Hair treatments also followed this trend. Some dyes contained lead or other heavy metals, promising rich, lasting colour. Others used harsh chemicals to straighten or curl hair. The immediate visual results were valued more than the potential for long-term damage. As with skin treatments, the effects of repeated exposure were slow to appear, making it easier for users to continue. The shops selling these products benefited from the overlap between beauty and medicine. Some creams and powders were marketed as both cosmetic and therapeutic, claiming to improve skin health while enhancing appearance. This dual promise widened their appeal and allowed sellers to charge higher prices. In social gatherings, subtle signs of cosmetic use could be a topic of conversation. A particularly smooth complexion or unusually bright eyes might prompt quiet admiration or speculation. For the user, these reactions reinforced the belief that the products were worth the effort and risk. By the later years of the century, some medical voices began to raise concerns about the cumulative effects of these chemicals. Articles appeared warning of lead poisoning or mercury damage. Still, the warnings were often buried among advertisements and competing claims. Without strict regulation, there was no consistent way to test or confirm the dangers. The market for beauty products remained strong because it catered to a deeply rooted desire, the wish to be seen favourably. In a society where appearances could influence marriage prospects, employment, and social acceptance, the cost of stopping seemed greater than the cost of continuing. Manufacturers understood this and tailored their marketing accordingly. The cycle persisted, with new products appearing and older ones being rebranded. The look of refinement stayed the same, even as the ingredients shifted slightly. The connection between beauty and status ensured that the demand did not wane, regardless of health implications. For many, the dressing table was a place of transformation. A few minutes with the right powders, creams, and drops could change how one felt about facing the day. The rituals were personal yet shaped by broader cultural forces. The hazards, though present, were hidden under layers of scent, colour, and polished glass. From the shelves of the chemist to the privacy of the home, these substances quietly shaped how people saw themselves and each other. In the next part, we will turn to the less visible side of Victorian drug culture, where substances intended for relief began to weave into the rituals of daily comfort. From the private rituals of beauty, the Victorian fascination with chemical enhancement extended to what people chose to drink. Among the options available, certain alcoholic beverages had effects that went beyond the usual warmth and relaxation associated with spirits. Chief among these was absinthe, a drink that carried a reputation for sophistication and a hint of danger. Its green hue and distinctive aroma set it apart from other spirits, and its popularity was particularly strong among artists, writers, and those who moved in bohemian circles. Absinthe was made from wormwood and a blend of other herbs, creating a flavour that was strong and often described as bitter with a lingering complexity. It was typically diluted with water before drinking, sometimes poured over a sugar cube placed on a special slotted spoon. The preparation became a small performance, adding to the drink's mystique. For some, the ritual was as important as the drink itself. The effects of absinthe were said to be different from other alcohols. Many users reported a heightened sense of creativity, a clarity of thought that allowed ideas to flow more freely. For those in the arts, this promise of inspiration was enough to make it a staple at gatherings. It is almost amusing how quickly people forget the risks when convinced that a drink can make them more talented. Alongside absinthe, other herbal spirits found their way into fashionable circles. Some were distilled with exotic ingredients brought from distant colonies, giving them an air of novelty. These drinks were not just about taste, but about the image they projected. To be seen with a glass of something unusual suggested a certain worldliness and refinement. In an era before strict regulation, the strength of these drinks varied greatly. Some batches of absinthe contained high levels of alcohol in addition to the psychoactive compounds from wormwood. This combination could produce powerful effects that were unpredictable. Yet the lack of standardization was rarely viewed as a drawback. If anything, it added to the sense of adventure. In cafes and private clubs, absinthe had its place on the menu. Regular patrons might develop a preference for a particular brand or style of preparation. The glassware, the spoons, and even the water used for dilution could be points of discussion. Drinking it became part of a larger social performance, a way to signal one's membership in a particular cultural set. The association between absinthe and artistic circles was reinforced by paintings, poems, and stories that depicted it as a source of inspiration. Whether these works reflected reality or simply built upon the drink's reputation, they helped cement its status. The connection between creativity and chemical alteration was romanticized, making abstinence seem almost unambitious by comparison. Some herbal liquors were marketed as medicinal, blurring the line between recreation and health. They were said to aid digestion, calm the nerves, or improve circulation. These claims gave them an added layer of acceptability, allowing people to justify their use even outside of purely social contexts. If energy drinks today were sold as both a cure and a luxury, the pattern would feel